Hello, welcome. This is Jennifer. We are in her garage. She's going to give us a little tour of some of her home repairs she's done herself. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. So I've done a number of projects in my garage. It started with, if we look down at the floor, you can see that there is a spider webbing effect of where my floor liked to split. It did this before I purchased my house, so I don't really know what conditions led to it. I'm assuming that it was old tree roots and the fact that the back of my garage used to leak water in because the previous owner did some poor landscaping in the back. But anyways, so to take care of that, what I did was I went online and I looked up a lot of information first, and it recommended using an angle grinder, which I borrowed from my dad because I don't actually own this. And I needed a special wheel, and I don't know how well you can see. I tried to bring some photos as well. Unfortunately, the wheel that I purchased has gone missing, so we have a photo.
Yes.
So that was a crack chaser wheel, and it has a special wedge to the edge of the blade. This is not it, but it is designed to create slightly larger sections in concrete and possibly other materials, but definitely concrete, so that way you can put in a filling material and take hairline cracks from something that's kind of impossible to work with to something that you can actually repair. For this, there was lots of safety equipment involved because I like all my digits and body parts and blood and everything to stay where they belong. I also had knee pads because the floor is very difficult and hard, and I spent an entire weekend on my knees. I also had steel-toed boots because why not, and gloves. I just don't have those items with me right now. So safety equipment is very important. Make sure you have the safety equipment information for how to use an angle grinder. There was a manual that came with my tool. I read it, and so I made sure that the guard was in place, and I very carefully went across all the cracks and widened up the ones that needed to be widened, and then there were others that were very large and didn't need to be widened.
Some big guys.
In the world of photos that I took along the way, this is what it looked like when it was widened. More widened. Lots of dust is created, so I wore an N95 mask as well, so I didn't breathe in concrete dust. And I vacuumed it up with my shop vac before I worked, so that way I had a clean place to put in the sealants.
Awesome.
All right, this was everything nice and chased. And then I backfilled with sand because a lot of these cracks were very deep, and I didn't know how deep they went into the soil structure underneath, and I wanted something nice and stable to be able to seal on top of. Out of I think it's a 50-pound bag of sand or 25-pound bag, I went through about half of it, so that was a good idea for me. Unfortunately, that had some unintended consequences. My original plan was that I was going to use an epoxy to seal it. So I made sure that there were nice panels, baffles, so that way the epoxy didn't run out of the edge of the cracks. And I got all set up and I put the epoxy in, and epoxy apparently does not like being set on sand. It pulls the moisture out of it and it foams up and it kind of freaks out. So this is what happened. And I tried to pull it off and realized epoxy gets very hot when it sets. So that was a poor idea. Unfortunately, I had gloves, so that way I could try to get it out before it set in the really weird configuration. But again, safety equipment paramount. So then I went back and I realized, okay, epoxy's not gonna work. I'm going to use a cement caulk. So that's what I ended up doing. And that's what is currently, stepping on things. That's what's currently in there. It has split a little bit as it has set. This is a year and a half old now. It does settle. It's still pretty nice in my opinion. If I care enough, I can pull the caulk out with scraper tools and put in new, and I'm still pleased enough that this is how it lives right now.
Looks pretty good.
Thank you. And this has been able to withstand my car rolling over it for a year and a half, so super pleased. All right, so the next thing that came up was my gutter fell off. I don't know how many of you have had that happen, but I came out one day and the entirety of my gutter was hanging off, held up only by where the downspout is, because that was nice and secure, and the rest of it was not. At which point I found out that apparently historically there were gutter nails used, and the current practice is gutter screws. So the nails had fallen out, and the fascia board that the gutter attaches to, I might have had water getting in there around the nail holes. It had rotted slightly, so ended up, with the help of a friend, taking it all the way down, which involved using a ratchet tool set, so that way I could get the screws undone and be able to take apart the downspout enough so that way I could get the gutter up and off. And I took a photo of how it was put together so I could put it back together properly at the end.
Key.
I like photos.
Yes, very key.
So we took the gutter down. We used, my friend likes to use an impact driver, so I used an impact driver with a drill bit on it, and we drilled out where all the nail holes were, and we took wooden dowels and we glued them in and let them set. And what I did was I made sure that the dowels were slightly shorter than I thought they should be so that I could line them up properly with the front of the fascia board underneath. And maybe they don't go all the way as far as they could, but it also meant that we didn't have a problem trying to trim things up at the end. Because that's not fun. After all of that, it was an interesting combination of trying to hold the gutter back up while marking where all the different holes were, so that way we could drill pilot holes for the screws. And I have the screws. I wanted to take this off. So these I got at a local hardware store. They are long enough to go through your gutter, and they come with a protective shield so that way they are more resistant up there to weather and everything. So this goes in the gutter, this goes through the gutter into the garage. So tried to get pilot holes put up there, and it was an adventure trying to make sure everything lined up. We got it back up there, and then I realized that, as gutters should, it angles down towards the downspout, which meant that I had the fascia board on this side exposed between the rooftop and the drip level and where the gutter was. And that's not right, and I don't know what I did differently because it did not look like that when I took it down. At least I don't think it did. So, to address that, I picked up aluminum flashing. And I found the smallest amount I could because I only needed this much. And I have a bunch left over now, but that's okay. And I measured out what I needed, and I cut it with tin snips. Modern tin snips look very different, but when you have inherited tools, you don't complain. So we trimmed it down, more measuring, more drilling holes to get everything to line up, and then put it back up, and it's been working very nicely since then.
Very cool. I can almost see that flashing there.
Yes.
Nice, nice.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, a previous person who had lived here had borked the electrical in my garage. It was exposed wires, well, I mean, just like the actual wire material itself, not super exposed, but it was this, just hanging through the rafters. They somehow screwed up the circuit so that way the garage door opener would only work via remote control. There was no ability to get it to work manually, like the way that you normally have buttons and things. So, ended up tearing all of that out. And I don't know the preciseness of the code, but I talked to enough people who are more familiar with electrical work than I am. And the conduit that I set up, my understanding is this is fine for a garage. This is how it could/should be. So if the electrical code changes, don't quote me on this. But tore everything down all the way back to where the line comes in from the house. And the only things left were the wires that ran up to the external light and the line that runs in from the house. Ooh, how to get a good image. Okay. So, measured out how much conduit needed for various spots. My friend had a miter saw with a metal cutting disc. Very important, not a wood cutting disc, not anything else, metal cutting disc. And we cut the conduit to where it needed to be. I measured 4 times because I didn't want to have to recut. Now, metal conduit, when you cut it, has metal spurs on the end that are very ouchy. So I took, it's technically a wire brush for cleaning up copper pipe when you repair water issues, but the metal brush was very good for cleaning up the metal conduit for electrical too. Sandpaper got torn up pretty easily, so the metal, and there was another one that had all the wire bits on the inside, so I could just swish it around the outside. Some of the larger spurs I had to take off with pliers, but we got it clean enough that we weren't slicing our fingers. Also, gloves. Gloves are good. Again, safety. So, because my setup has permanent lights in addition to anything else, I went for a combination of whatever the yellow is, which can be hooked up to any kind of electrical circuit, is my understanding, and the white, which is only for lighting. So
There's 2 different gauges, maybe. I think it's 12. I think the yellow should be like a 12.2 or a 12.3.
I am looking for where it writes the gauge on it, and I don't see it. Just says Romex brand simple. So, unfortunately, I don't have the bag, but this definitely says 12.2.
12.2. Yep, that's a 12.2.
I don't know for this.
Alrighty, so that white was the 12.2 electrical wire that you used for the lights.
Correct. So, to feed both of these through the conduit, tried using fishing line. It did not work. It was very disastrous because the fishing line and the width of these and the narrowness of the conduit, like these would fit, but all 3 of them together where you tried to connect them, no. So we ended up taping these together with electrical tape and shoving it through the conduit. It was definitely brute forcing. Wore gloves because your hand jams against the end of the conduit as you do it. but it worked. And it works a lot better when you have fresh wire that doesn't have any warps or kinks in it. So that's how we got it through the lengths of the conduit. At the top, there is an angle. If we look over here, we can see this corner piece a lot better. There is a plate. So out of all the cost-saving things I tried to do, this I splurged on. I got the ones with the plate on the end, so that way you take the plate off, and then you can just feed it straight. And then loop the wire around without any twist, just a nice big curve, to feed it down and through the next piece. It does take some brute force pulling to get it snug, but it's so much nicer than trying to feed it through a 90-degree angle that you don't have access to. And then more lengths. I learned that with junction boxes, you need little metal collars to get the conduit to attach securely to the junction box. So it has a ring screw that comes off, you slide it in, and then the ring goes back on, so that way it stays secure to the junction box. And then there's this screw to attach it to the conduit. And inside the junction box, there is a green electrical screw that the ground not only attaches from one section to the other, but grounds to the box, so that way the entire system does whatever it's supposed to do electrically. There are some bits that I know I did things, I don't really know what I did. So,
did your classes in the electrical series at HRRC help out with some of that?
It would, unfortunately. The one that I was signed up for got canceled due to world issues. So I was very much looking forward to it. I am still looking forward to it.
Yes.
But for right now, I can't tell you. So there was a lot of measuring, of figuring out what lengths, what angles, how to get things. I ended up adding the 2 new outlets because I could. I mean, I'm doing all the rest of this work, why not? And one thing I did was there are outside outlets. They have like TW on them, and I don't think they're necessarily required for being in a garage because it's still in a structure, but for my peace of mind, I went for them just in case weird weather happenings in the garage. So I chose to have that extra bit of safety going. For the lights, there is a special collar that goes on the end of the conduit, and you'll notice that it is secured in by this little bracket, but the collar closes off the end of the conduit so the wire can come out, but nothing can get up in there. And then it fed into the light, and it's connected in here with wire nuts. And it is good to have a friend buy the light when you turn it on to test it, because apparently one of the bulbs wasn't in all the way and it started smoking, so that got turned off very quickly and we fixed it. So that is most of the overview for that. And to fix the garage door opener, I tried to keep as much of the original wiring as possible, because to the sensors, there's soldering that goes on, and I don't want to have to deal with that. That's a level of electrical work that, no thank you. But to get the manual open and close connection, that I could do. So I ended up pulling out the original wire that was not working, and I got stereo wire because it has 2 connections that was important. And I hooked them up to the back of the garage door opener based on how the manual said to these lovely little wires here. Fed it going around and down, and I got a new doorbell. And so it's hooked up to the doorbell over here. So that way,
Lovely. Very nice.
the other fun bit was the sensors got misaligned, so fortunately they have a little light on them, so that way when they are properly aligned, the light lights up, so that meant I could do that on my own one evening. One important thing about the wires is what kind of staple you use to put them in place. I have 2 staple guns now, because staple guns and staples are very specific to each other. I had a normal staple gun with flat staples. The flat staples, despite my best efforts at spacing and being gentle, pressed into the stereo wire and shorted out the system, so it didn't want to work. What I needed was a staple that has a bit of a hoop or loop in it. So that way, when it goes in, there's that loop on the top that doesn't press into the wire. That solved the short problem.
And that requires a special staple gun as well.
It did. This is the staple gun. I don't know all the mechanics, but I can say that you can see how this is flat and how this has the curve, so that way it doesn't shove it all the way in.
Nice.
Wire strippers for making all the wire connections. And do you have any questions?
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer, for this tour of your garage rehab. It looks wonderful.